Build Show Live 2024 conference classes are brought to you by Builders First Source, Huber Engineered Woods, Pella, and Sascho. This session is sponsored by Polygaurd.
Build Show Network friends, I really appreciate you guys watching this classroom education. You know, Build Show Live, we had a ton of fun here at the inaugural event in Austin, Texas, and you get a little piece of this on the recorded version. I want to say a huge thanks to our friends at Builders First Source. They're the guys that made this possible. You know, everything we do on Build Show Network is free, and we really like to be able to give this knowledge to you guys for free. But it takes a lot of time and effort and people and money to make it happen. So I really want to say thank you to Builders First Source. If you're not currently a customer of theirs, consider checking to see if you have a location near you. They have like 500 locations around the country. They're terrific people to work with. I buy a ton of materials for them on an annual basis. Not just my ready frame or my lumber packages, but window and doors and interior millwork. And if you haven't learned about their digital tools, man, these guys are totally on board with the future of the building world. So you need to check those out. So big thanks to Builders First Source. And that being said, let's go check out our educational sessions.
Okay, so thank you for coming. I'll start off with a little context. I'm a owner of a remodeling company, but a carpenter at heart. So standing in front of people and talking publicly is extremely intimidating and nerve-wracking. So bear with me through that. What I hope you get out of this more than anything is sort of my approach towards tool and inventory management. And a lot of people who sort of follow me on social media, they get the sense that I'm sort of neurotic and OCD because I'm sort of meticulous in the way I organize things. And the first thing I want to sort of talk about is why that's not the case. So the reason I organize things and I try to be efficient is because I worked for someone for many years who was a normal contractor and everything was just chaos. So I spent a lot of time looking for tools, and it was frustrating as someone who wanted to better their career to, you know, roam around and look for things when I knew there was a better way. And so this is sort of want to give you the context for why I do it, and then I'll share some specifics about sort of what I've done and what's worked and what hasn't. But the goal for sort of streamlining inventory and tool management should always be a focus on letting more value flow to the customer. How can you get the job done quicker so you can either make more profit or charge less? It shouldn't be like a pursuit of organization for the sake of it being beautiful or for the sake of like a passion hobby, if that makes sense. Because a lot of people who come up to me, they sort of see it as I don't know how to say it exactly, but they see it as more of the physical manifestation of things being organized and not the fact that everything is being driven by efficiency, because carpenters in general are not compensated fairly in my mind. So the less time we can have them looking around for things, the more time they can be adding value, and hopefully the more money we're able to pay them, right? And if they have the right tool, then it's more likely the quality of work is going to go up, so they can be more effective at the job. We're not managing defects. We're not ripping things out later. So that's the context of it. So let's jump into it. So I'm Zack Dettmore. I'm based out of Jersey, so you understand sort of my situation is I live about 8 miles outside of Manhattan, so we typically are on small lots. We have a lot of traffic, so it can take me anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to go 11 miles. So running back and forth to a lumber yard or to my shop to get something we forgot is pretty expensive. And the cost of living is high, so I'm paying people a lot of money. So I want the carpenters to not be traveling, to be stuck on the job site and being profitable. The type of work we do is typically remodels. So we do remodels that go from $5,000 up to $2 million, and we're self-performing. There's 4 carpenters in my company plus me, and we're self-performing framing and all the trim carpentry ourselves, and then we're doing a lot of infill for scopes of work that can't necessarily be delegated. So we work on old houses, so we have a ton of tools, but we don't have a lot of space. Shop space is very expensive. Parking is very expensive. So I try to be as effective as I can be without having an excess, because it's not like maybe a job site in the middle of the country where we could have a 16-foot trailer and a big barn to store things in. It's just too expensive to sort of manage that. But this is the guy I worked for over a decade, so that's his van, and what he had was basically 2 big Stanley boxes that all the tools were in, and then we would fire drywall and plywood on top of it, so if you had to go get a tool, you would have to sort of lift up the plywood, get the box open, and kind of crawl around, and I did that for basically 10 years, which amounted to quite a lot of time spent looking for tools, and quite a lot of frustration. So working for him for a decade, as much as he ran a very profitable company, he prioritized sort of profitability and paying people a low enough wage that he didn't mind having them waste their time in the vehicle. And that's not a great way to sort of retain talent, I certainly didn't. I worked there a long time, but it wasn't sort of something I could ladder up and make more money in. So quickly, after starting my own company, I started my own company around 17. Great time. That's my first house I bought when I was 17. Bought it right before the economic crash for about $280,000. Shortly, maybe 5 years later, I was able to sell it for $150,000. So it was a great profitable experience for me. But that sort of losing that much money at an early point in my life really sort of put a lot of pressure on me, because I was in over $100,000 worth of debt, and I needed to be profitable right out the gate. So I bought this Astro van, and I started immediately outfitting my tools in a way that every second of my time was optimized, so I was able to be as profitable as possible, because it was a financial downturn, and it wasn't really a great time. So then I jumped over to this van, and this one was good, but it was sort of limiting. So I had a painting company at this time, so it was a perfect van for painting, but as a lot of us contractors know, you keep expanding your tool collection and constantly outgrowing. But what I learned with this vehicle was really to try and make everything accessible without going in the vehicle. So most frequently used tools are sort of by the back door, and that was a huge priority for me in terms of making sure I was never stepping into the vehicle and putting the heaviest tools out by the back. But one of the things that was really noticeable about this van for me was the fact that I hung all of the paintbrushes on these little screws, and it was just incredibly loud when driving around, and it was extremely annoying. So as my tools grew, I decided I would maximize the vehicle after losing that money, and since I've never taken out a loan for anything. It's all a cash business, basically. So instead of buying a new van that was bigger, I decided to have a custom bed slide made and put this in the back of my van. And it basically slid out and allowed me to store everything. But because it took up most of the space in the vehicle, I built a cart, and you could actually put the cart under it and then just pop this out and leave it in the customer's garage. And then I would drive around with an empty van. So it was a pretty cool build. The issue with it is it really was incredibly heavy and kind of awkward, and Eventually what ended up happening was one of my employees opened it on a hill and it wasn't latched, and the whole thing flew out and bent the metal track. So that sort of forced me out. But what I started to notice with this setup was, because every spot was highly customized, things were always going back into the right spot, because you couldn't sort of jam the compressor into the miter saw hole. It was always immaculately maintained because things were very specific. The downside is really that it doesn't encourage growth as you change tools, because you can't modify that system at all. And as we all know, our businesses are constantly evolving. So that's what that vehicle looked like when it was empty. And this worked out really well because you could load up everything and everything was dry. How many of you in this audience here drive a pickup truck? All right. And where are the van people at? All right. So the rest of you with the trucks can leave now. You've got it all wrong. But, oh, that's true. All right. Yeah, I'm back on team trailer now, but we'll get to that. But this was a cool setup, but I just sort of wanted to show the progress. So after that van, my employee broke that. I finally sold that house and got out from under debt. And the first thing I did was bought a Tundra and a trailer in the Ron Polk. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Ron Polk and his tool organization, but he's, I'll sort of give a brief overview of what he's done, but he's been immensely helpful for my career. And I would say the biggest takeaway from Ron Polk is he doesn't want to unstrap, unclip, or move something to access a tool. So those drawers basically lift up and pull out, and there is nothing blocking access to the tools, because the way I like to think about it is think like a lazy person. I don't know how many of you are in the field grabbing tools constantly and how many of you are business owners, but there's sort of two different mindsets, right? There are very effective people who by their nature put things back in the right place and they get a lot of peace from that. That would be my wife. And there are people like me who have dyslexia and ADHD, and I need some sort of guidance to make sure things are being put back the same way. And I think if you're like me and you're designing systems for people like me, it can be easy to design these systems. But if you're someone who's, it is easy to stay organized, you don't need a label or some sort of reminder of where things go, you get frustrated with your employees because you're saying, why is this place always a mess? Why are things not going back? And you're blaming your employees instead of understanding that people think differently than you, especially that people who tend to excel in the trades, who understand how carpentry works, who excel a lot of this work, have a lot of these sort of brain tendencies that I do, that they need things to be very, very clear. And I sort of invite you, if you are designing systems for your company, but your brain doesn't work that way, to empathize with people like me, because you're going to get better results out of it. You don't get superior results out of your team from saying, just put it back in the right spot. I don't know why, we've got the miter saw and you're not putting the trash can under it. It just makes sense to do that, but you're not doing it. As a leader, you have to create a system where it's easier for them to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing, and you have to do it across the whole business, right? So if you're not familiar with Ron Polk, definitely check out his videos, but basically he's got a couple things to really take note of, and it's basically he's using plywood, but everything's modular. So you can move all these drawers around, you can move all these partitions around, and of all the things I've tried in my career, I keep coming back specifically to the organization you see to the left and right of my miter saw, which is sort of a high up slots, and you can move the partitions left and right. So as you're changing things, you can modify this. So I have this in my trailers, and I have this in my shop right now. And the beauty of it is it's an hour of disassembly, moving things around, and you've reorganized, versus if you get super specific with your shelving, modifying it in the future is a whole thing, right? What I liked about working out of a trailer was I didn't have the money for a fleet of vehicles at the time. So our projects at the time were like bathroom remodels. They weren't that big, but I could leave the trailer on the job site. The tools were locked up, and the trailer was plugged in to shore power. And basically, we were always charging batteries. We always had a dry spot. And one thing you'll notice that was very important that I sort of made a shift in my career at this point was having outfeed behind the table saw. You see it there, but getting in the habit of making sure that when you have a table saw, you have a plan for outfeed, because I don't know where you work, but for us, workman's comp is extremely expensive, and we're always one claim away from really killing our profitability. So identifying where people are going to get hurt and solving for that with your organization, make it so that it's easy to do things safely, whether that means buying a saw stop, whether that means having a table saw that's bolted to some sort of outfeed, or you have to remove the outfeed to get to the table saw. You could sort of design your organizational system in a way that it encourages your workers to work more safely. And prior to switching to this, I had some incidences with kickback or with a table saw that was rocking, and I've really, you know, I don't know, this was a I'll say this is like a 2012 photo. Since then, we really haven't had any safety issues with table saws. But another thing I really liked was having air above the workbench. At the time, we didn't have any cordless nail guns, and the act of setting up a compressor and the hose is a huge time suck. So having it all built in allowed us to, we found ourselves doing a lot more pre-assembly, and building this allowed us to sort of move from sort of stick assembling our casing and doing more pre-assembly, because we just found it was quicker, because we already had air there, we had electric there, we had the table saw there, and we moved that. And you know, the benefit was if I had to run and grab something at the lumber yard, all the tools were there. So I liked that about the trailer. What I didn't like was at the time I didn't have employees that I could really trust to drive through sort of commuter traffic pulling a trailer. So that's sort of the major drawback if you're in a really congested area, is you need people who can pull trailers, and people who can pull trailers are probably more expensive than people who can't, right? But I love that about the trailer. All right, so the next thing is sort of figuring out a place for everything. And what you're seeing here is one of my sort of first attempt at organizing all of my bits and drivers and getting them into one spot. So this is, if you're not familiar with it, this is the original style of a Festool sortainer, I believe it's called. And the brilliance of it is it has a lot of compartments, and it's easy to sort of configure. You don't have to break out a saw and make your own. It's all in there, and it works. The downside to this is if you could imagine opening a Milwaukee Packout and you're looking at everything. With this, you had a dozen individual drawers, and I would find myself sort of going, and the whole idea of being efficient is eliminating waste, right? And which is how many of you are sort of familiar with lean? Got that a bit, right? So for those of you who are not, the idea of lean is basically figuring out where value is for your customer and where waste is, identifying waste. And waste can be wasted motion, it could be over-processing, but sort of the way I could explain it is, imagine a client hires you to put in crown molding, right? So you tell them it's $500 to put crown molding in this room, right? And what the client wants to pay you for, what the value is when the material is sort of changing. So when the material is being cut, there could be value. When it's being nailed to the wall, there's value. When it's being painted, there's value. But there's no value when you're picking it up. There's no value when you're vacuuming up the dust. There's no value when you are running back to the shop to grab your pin nailer because you got it. So training yourself and your employees to see waste and then identify how do we minimize this. Because when you're installing crown molding, what percentage of the time of that total job do you think is value-added activity? Anyone got a guess? 25%? I think it's closer. I could be wrong, but I think it's closer to 5%. And it's probably even less than that. If you think of like how much time are you actually spending, this is not a cut, measuring's not a cut, the cut is the value. The nail entering the wood is the value, not the loading the nails into the gun, not the setting up the compressor. So it could be a little overwhelming because you think, well, how am I gonna, you're never gonna get to 100% value-added activity, but the idea is to just identify those things, and we're already doing this, right? We're already saying, or we should be telling our employees, like, don't walk for free, right? Like, take some trash out with you. You went to get something, bring a tool in. Like, we're already trying to instill these good habits of productivity, but we need to go beyond that, and case in point here is it's not effective to have a situation like this. It's all nicely organized, but having to open all these individual drawers is not efficient. And the other thing that's not efficient is whatever the Festool engineers who designed this were crazy, because the whole top, the underside of this system is sort of a matrix of plastic. So if you've got a screw that pops up, which of course it does, the drawer doesn't open. So I probably have paid people the equivalent of $10,000 to stand at this thing and like shake the drawer like crazy to get the screw to drop down. And that can seem like a silly thing to fixate on, but if you're familiar with someone called Paul Akers, who manufactures Fast Cap, that's his business, he says, fix what bugs you. And if something bugs you in your workflow, if it feels like a bottleneck, like shaking the drawer or opening all the drawers, that's a cue to this is not working, right? But back to a spot for everything. You need to have a spot for everything, or else you're going to constantly be battling employees putting things in the wrong spot, and you need to train them on where things go, right? You can't hold an employee to accountability on where things go if you have no system for it, right? It can't be, one sort of example I like to give is if you go to a Home Depot, for example, do you walk through the shelves, right? Is it up to the employees of that store's discretion to sort of decide where things should go? Can they sort of mix it up every day? Or is there a spot and it's labeled and it's there? And if Home Depot's wildly more successful than probably any construction company in this room, right? So if they don't think it's acceptable to run it that way, why do we think in a lower margin business that we can do things that way? So I get a lot of feedback from other builders like, I wish I had your time to just label things. Must be nice to just spend your whole day labeling things. And to that I say, well, you know, it frees up time to do other things. But sort of, how do you start with this is, it can seem a little daunting because it is a massive amount of work, but start small. Start with the things you know you have. If you own a printer and you have printer ink, then label where the paper goes, label where the toner goes, and then three things, right? And make it clear and make it easy to tell when things are running out. You don't have to start where I'm at, where I've got a spot for every single screw. But there's a bunch of ways you can sort of tackle things, and I think it's sort of easier for the more specific your scope is, the easier it is to label things. So if you're a cabinet installer, like I was for many years, it was much easier than me being a remodeling contractor where I have finished tools and I've got a little bit of electrical parts and I've got a little bit of plumbing parts. But the more specific trade-wise you are, the easier it is to kind of get into it. But you can see I've made cutouts in plywood at the top here in a previous design, and then later I found out about foam. So here, this is called Kaizen foam, but basically I'm just cutting out, and then you could see at the bottom there a wrench is missing, and it's a clear visual indicator. You guys have never seen this drawer before, but you can tell something's missing, and that's sort of what I'm talking about of think like a lazy person. Like a lazy person is, if they have that wrench in their hand, they're not just going to toss it in the drawer, they're going to place it in the right location, or there's going to be some sort of cue that it's missing. And it means that when you get to the next job and you need that, or if you're running several jobs, hopefully you have what you need at the next job. And because we lose so much money, at least my company does, by showing up and having this conversation about like, oh, we didn't have, yesterday happened, I got a call from one of my carpenters, where's the boroscope? And I was like, oh, I'm doing a personal renovation at my house. So I took it out of the van and it's sitting in the basement. And he's like, yeah, come on, dude, like we need that right now. And so my wife had to run and grab it because I'm not there. And that's waste, right? That's wasted gas, wasted time. My wife gets paid much more. She shouldn't be running around doing that. So I don't have a clear spot for the boroscope. So they didn't know it was missing until they needed it and they were looking for it. So you need some sort of physical reminder. That's called Kaizen foam. You can get it from kaizensource.com or you can get it at fastcap.com. And if you go to kaizensource.com, they sell a kit which comes with sort of like markers and knives. I think it's 20 or 30 bucks, but it makes it a little bit easier to do all of that. So, and it is an amazingly like calming process, cutting out the foam and doing all that. It can be fun. The only thing about it is it's not a modular system. It's not something that's modifiable. So honestly, at this point in my business where it's growing so much, we use Kaizen foam for like packing tape and like really specific tasks that we know aren't changing in the office where we have like staplers and things like that in Kaizen foam, but we don't really use it for our tools anymore because our business is evolving and we're deciding we're going to take on this scope of work. We're going to stop, we're going to stop framing. So if I had a spot for all the framing guns, now we don't do that anymore, right? But design your systems, like there we go, the lazy person, right? Which I was fortunate that that I'm the lazy person in this case, right? But make it easier to put things in the correct location. If I'm going to build on that, if you make it satisfying to put the thing in the right spot, you can actually have better results. So a good example of that might be like, it sounds a little silly, but snapping a pack out into something or placing something into foam where it's cut out is sort of a satisfying experience. Whereas like jockeying a 6-foot ladder onto the roof and then finding a strap and you're like up there balancing is not a satisfying process. So your team members aren't going to want to do that. So making it like, just think about flow state, right? Like you want things to flow back into place. So it can be very easy when you're designing a van like this, you're trying to get as many tools, you'll say, all right, the toolbox is 6 inches tall, so I'm going to make the opening 6 1/4, right? And then what happens when you're trying to put it in there? You're trying to line it up just right because you made the tolerances too tight. That's not a satisfying experience. So guess what? Things are just going to get thrown on the floor, and they do. So that's sort of part of it. Back to the heavy tools in the front. So this particular vehicle we have, this is a ProMaster van, the extended wheelbase, and it has we're looking at the back of the partition, right? And at that partition, there's a sliding side door. So there's that plywood piece you see there is a workbench that we slide out, a 5x3 workbench. Then there's a miter saw at the side door, a table saw at the side door, a 6-foot ladder. So we've got all the heavy stuff you access without going in the vehicle. If you had to walk down that aisle and put the miter saw in that way, guess where the miter saw would be? It would just be blocking the aisle right inside the back doors because it's Friday, we all want to get back to our family and we're too lazy to put it in the right place. We'll deal with it Monday, right? And then when I need something over the weekend, am I going to move the miter saw back to where it goes, or am I going to climb over it? And it's just sort of this downward spiral. Placing frequently used tools by the doors is pretty common sense, right? You're trying to minimize your steps, so you shouldn't be going into the van. For me, it's going to be tool belts. It's going to be commonly used fasteners. It's going to be caulking and sealant we use It's going to be long items like rails and levels, ladders, and vacuums. You want to put things that are important to your core business by the door. So we do a lot of live-in remodels. We do a lot of high-end remodels. And cleanliness is next to godliness, right? Like you can, at least in my experiences, I get more referrals from the client being satisfied by how clean we were than the execution of the actual work. We could have these wide open miters and a crappy grout job, and if the place was meticulous, we're more likely to get a referral than if we were slobs, but we turned over this masterpiece of craftsmanship. And as a carpenter, that kind of bugs me, but that's the truth. So I've got vacuums by the door, I've got cleaners by the door, microfiber rags by the door. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible to keep the job site clean, brooms and all that stuff, right? So same thing, put tools that are used at the end of the job by the door. So for our case, it's going to be a leaf blower, right? You don't want to sort of pack the van with scaffolding and all this stuff and then realize there's dust on the client's driveway, but the blower's buried in there. So the leaf blower, you know, is going to be the last thing to go into the van, so it should be by the door. Grouping similar tools together. So this is another one I lifted from Paul Akers, but it kind of goes, put the solution to the problem where the problem occurs. So in my shop, for example, we've got a shadow board with 3 nail guns on it, and below them, we've got the nails, and below that, we have the air fittings. So how many times have you been like, I know I own this fitting for the gun, this gasket, but I don't know where the heck it is, or the lubrication for the gun. Is it in a drawer somewhere? Is it in a toolbox? I know I own it, but I'm just going to buy another one because I need to fix this. So whenever I'm at the pneumatic area, I'm able to see the stuff, so I put the solution where the problem is. I shouldn't have a vacuum in one spot and then the vacuum wand somewhere else because, you know, maybe my plumber wants to borrow something and jump in the back of my van. It should be easy for him to grab that thing without asking me. If he's coming to ask for me, he's stopping me from working. That's waste, right? And then finally, this particular van was built, we were working in apartment buildings. So every tool is sort of grouped into a box, and the concept was then we're maintaining the organization that lives in the van on the job site. So we take all these boxes, bring it into the job, and then it wasn't this like thinly layered mess of tools that spread over the floor of the whole job. We were able to organize them into boxes. And that worked then. Now that we sort of do bigger projects that span 12 months and they're full home remodels, we've sort of switched back to more of that Polk style situation where we have tools individually and we're just grabbing them because we found it to be more wasteful to have to go in, take a box out, open the box, pull the tool, close the box, push it back in versus just grabbing a nail gun and going. So it's sort of important to know what your workflow is and when it makes sense to have a grab and go box with everything you need and when it's important to just have a nail gun sitting on its own. All right. So I drank the Festool Kool-Aid very hard with this system. I was like, oh, this is going to be the latest and greatest thing. And it was good, but what we were finding was they don't offer, you see this 3-drawer system? What we were finding was we were stacking these boxes on top of each other, and then we're restacking. Once we get on the job site and you have a tower of boxes, it was incredible. The tool we needed was always at the bottom, right? And then you're doing this awkward lift, and that's the opposite of flow. So the reason I sort of got away from the Festool Sortainer system, which is, it's the best system in terms of utilization of space, because when you open that box, you've got almost the full volume of storage in that box, versus if you open a pack out by Milwaukee, they've got these bars and this thick plastic and gaskets. You're not getting sort of the same storage value, but they offer bigger drawers that you can actually get nail guns in. So we've switched to pack out from this, but I was full on Festool at this time. But the drawer sort of system is what sort of made me drop it. And also, I felt like, or my wife actually made this call. She said, we're hiring people that are coming in with packouts. And they're not, it's rare that it's almost, you should be a little worried if you hire someone and they're showing up with all sustainers. You're like, I probably can't afford this person, right? I'm probably not going to make any money off this guy, right? So yeah, it was the lack of drawers that really drove us away from the. And feel free to interject any questions as you have, because I'm just going to keep rolling. Yeah. It is plywood painted black, and what's holding those in place is just there's a foot on the sustainer it's just dropping in, so there's nothing holding those in place aside from gravity. And one thing to notice is that everything's painted black, and that's wasteful. If you are making something beautiful for the sake of making it beautiful, no value is flowing to the customer because I painted that black. And it's important to know the difference. And although, it was a bit of like a passion project for me, and I'm not saying that it was wrong to do that, it's important to know the difference, because there's people, maybe you're a self-performing contractor or carpenter, and you take real pride in your tools, and you want to make this trophy chest of your beautiful tools. That's great that you want to do that, but identify that is not making you money, and that is not helping your business in any way aside from satisfying your need. And that was what I was doing in this photo, right? So here's a couple mistakes I made. Don't expect coworkers to put things where you do. So it's got to be clearly labeled, and it's got to make sense. Anytime you have a strap, a tie down, something you need to fumble with, it's a waste. Things that are hard to modify, like this big fancy box I made. Don't make things too specific, right? So cutting out things in wood, cutting out things in foam that you're gonna change. I've had a couple people who follow me on social media, and they said, hey man, I made a van just like you. You wanna see it? And they built all the heavy stuff on one side. So this van, Ford Transit, brand new, is literally like this. And I was like, I don't know if you should drive this thing. Like they had open storage on one side and put every single heavy tool on one side. And understand that this is a moving vehicle that you have to acknowledge safety, right? And don't fill all the available spaces. Like you need a spot for clutter, not only in your shop, but in your vehicle, because if it doesn't go into a spot, it'll go on the floor, which is going to encumber your ability to grow into the vehicle, but also it's just going to clutter things up. So if you're stopping and buying things on the way to the job, where are those things going? If you have miscellaneous leftovers from the job, are you throwing those things out? Are you educating your people on what is acceptable to throw out? We have a sort of a company rule, like if it's not getting used on the next job, for example, like a 90-degree metal elbow, we know we're going to use that pretty much on every job for a bathroom vent fan or something. Let's take that off the job and keep it. But if it's this Jolly Schluter edge that's matte black that we used, like what are we holding on to this for? We don't know. Could be 10 years before we have another job, and then I'm just going to pay these outrageous property taxes on a shop to store this thing that I'm never going to use. So come up with a rule so that your team can sort of take action on what to keep and what to get rid of, because you can have a meticulous shop with your rolls of Schluter and your extra insulation, your rock wool and your foam, and it's just beautiful, and you think, look at how efficient and organized I am. And what you're doing is you're just wasting stuff. You're just wasting space, because you could have that space open for more profitable items. You already live near stores that organize and hold all the products you use. Why are you recreating that if you don't need to? So don't fall into that trap of holding on to too much stuff. It's probably easier for some of you that live in more rural areas, but certainly for me, I've had a meticulous shop and everything's in its place, and it's not profitable. So This is what's currently our framing trailer, and it's a little bit more modular. So we've sort of gone full pack out on this. And one thing that's modular about this trailer is you'll notice we've used E-track on the wall to store these brackets to hold the pack outs. And the nice thing about that is you can snap these brackets off, and now we have an open trailer to bring equipment in, or like a small little skid steer or trencher can all be rolled into the back of this trailer. So making things that are easy to modify, we can add them lower down, we can take them off. You'll see there's no brackets on the bottom. So coming up with systems that are modular, they all clip together, but also that are easy to modify. If I made this out of plywood, which I've done in the past, I would be very tied in to doing that. And so stay with one system for storage. We did pack out because they had the most accessories. They're readily available at the Home Depot by us if we need to replace it. And it sort of allows everything to clip together no matter the vehicle it's in. They're constantly developing. There's a lot of great new ones coming to the market. So if you're just starting this journey, I don't know if I would go with the pack out. I think Makita's the one to watch right now with some of their new ones, but we'll see. And obviously pick something that clips together so you can make it work. This shelving, that's made by Milwaukee. So you just buy that black thing, and it clips into E-track. So if you have a box truck or any sort of flat surface, I bought that E-track at Harbor Freight, but you can pretty much use any E-track, and it'll go vertically or horizontally. If you are familiar with plumbingsupplyhouse.com, that's the best place to get it, at least in my area. It's the cheapest price, and they're like $100 and something bucks for a 3-pack, I think. All right, so this is sort of an example of if you're a specific tradesperson who's doing the same thing, or you have employees within your business who are doing the same thing, how you can really speed up your workflow. So I decided to do cabinet install for a couple years after having kids, because I was just trying to simplify sort of the complexity of running large remodels. Was a lot to manage. So I said, I'll just do cabinetry install. And I found when I was installing cabinets, I was doing a lot of scribes. I was constantly setting down the track saw. And I didn't have what I needed. So I basically made this piece of plywood. Once again, I painted it, which is not a value add, right? But I thought it looked cool. And then I kept putting my track saw back. There's a belt sander on the opposite side. I had all the scribes and bits I commonly used. And you would be hard-pressed to install cabinetry faster than I did with this setup, because I always had everything I needed, and I would load up quickly. I could wheel this whole thing into a job, and I had exactly what I needed, but I didn't have any excess. So that's the major thing, is you want exactly the tools you need. The more clutter you have around you, the less efficient you're going to be, especially when you're swinging large, expensive cabinets around. Some of these cabinetry packages were over $200,000 that I was putting in, and having hoses and stuff in my way really slowed us down. Sometimes we're working in tight apartments. I did, and there's magnets that are holding those cans in place, so nothing pops off of that. Everything's sort of snapped and locked in, and I don't think in my existing business, full home remodels, it's possible for me to get there with that specificity. But if you are the type of person who installs shower doors every day, or does tile every day, or cabinetry, this seems like maybe it's an obsessive level of detail, but it became an absolute pleasure to do that work, because I was never looking for something, and everything was right there and just falling back. And at the end of the day, instead of wrapping up at 4 o'clock to leave at 4:30, I was able to wrap up at 4:15 because my tools were constantly being put back in the right spot, right? So this was a pretty fun little build, and I think it's important to kind of see what you're using and look critically at your tools. Like at the time I had, there was no cordless belt sander available. So I bought a rigid belt sander, which was the only one available, and I put a Makita adapter on it so that I was able to use that and not have multiple battery chargers. And all my fasteners are in those drawers. Below, there's no restacking because it's all full drawers. And I see a lot of the most efficient carpenters in the industry using something similar to this where they're using 2 drawer packouts. The big drawback is those things are too heavy for most people to carry, and there's no handle on top. It's super awkward. You got to carry it like this. So I don't know. It's not a perfect system. I don't have time for this stuff, right? So this is just sort of like a simple, this is the biggest thing I get is like, I don't have time to do this, so I'm not going to do it. Must be nice that you have nothing going on in your life, Zach, that you can just spend your time organizing stuff, but I run an actual business and I don't have time to do it. So I sort of just ran some numbers on if you're paying someone $55 an hour and they're looking for tools 10 minutes a day, and you've got 2 people working for you 5 days per week, 52 weeks a year, 260 days, how much is that actually costing you? And it's costing me roughly $477, and we haven't factored in workman's comp and taxes and vacation and all the other stuff that gets piled on top of my burden rate. But if you, I guess you have time to spend them looking around for things, just consider spending the time to stop work, talk about what improvements can be made, and take the time to do it properly, and then take the time to maintain it. It's easy for it to come apart. So I want to talk a little bit about choosing vehicles. Basically, in a nutshell, it's how much stuff can you get in that vehicle and not compromise your workflow. For me, it comes down to as big as possible that fits in a parking spot. So a 16-foot box truck does not work. That would hold everything I need, but it would eliminate me from driving on roads that have 10,000-pound weight restrictions. So I can't have anything with a double axle in the back because it'll mean I have to take alternative roads, and it'll mean I can't fit in parking spots. So I'm pretty much limited to a single wheel vehicle, like a long ProMaster. Maybe it's got I think my next purchase is gonna be a box truck, but a single rear, not a dual. But understanding sort of what's gonna be the right choice for you is important. And then finally, inventory. We talked a lot about tools, but as many of you know, like running out of a screw can bring a project to its knees, right? There's certain things like we'll run out of a GRK tip. And so we've got all these screws, and all of a sudden now no one can get any work done because we don't have that specific tip. So managing inventory is incredibly important. I can't tell you that as we stop maintaining our vehicles, we start making triple the trips to Home Depot. I just ran 2 projects. I put 2 different people managing those projects, one with 15 years experience, one with 6 years experience, and the one with 6-year experience probably had 5 trips to Home Depot per week, and the other one had 0, because every day he had more experience. He was getting in front and saying, I'm going to have things for delivery, I'm going to make lists, and the other one was just like winging it and constantly running out of stuff. So what we've done in this vehicle is basically we put all the consumables, anything that needs to be replenished in these Milwaukee organizers at the time. I couldn't afford Festool ones, or Festool didn't make ones at the time. Festool didn't make ones with a clear lid at the time, and having a clear lid's good because you could slide it out and look into it. So what I liked about this is you could basically run inventory by just opening and looking, and you're not making a lot of steps through the vehicle or overlooking everything. So that's how we manage inventory in this particular vehicle. What we've switched to, is that a question or a sneeze? What we've switched to now is basically keeping everything in packouts, but we're starting to standardize everything. So this particular one is what we keep our bits and drivers in. We've figured out what are the most essential bits and drivers that we use all the time. This is them for our workflow, and we have 7 boxes like this. Every employee has one, and every vehicle has one, and there's a full one in the shop. So if we run out of Craig bits, they can either buy a new Craig bit and put it in there, or they can just give me that one and take a full one from the shop. And the nice thing about that is if I get to work late and my vehicle's down the street, but the lead carpenter's got his truck and I need something, I'm not wondering where it is. There's consistency through our whole system, and this is really the biggest shift we've made in the last year, is every vehicle is getting boxes that are identical. So we have PPE, which will have glasses in it and hearing protection and masks, and we'll have one that's got microfiber rags and trash bags and tape, and we've got one for fasteners, and basically everything is identical, and everything's labeled the same, and it makes replenishing them much easier because you've sort of exercised that muscle. Every box looks the same in every vehicle, and even though we're not at the point of profitability where we can just get rid of our 2 trailers and get rid of the van and get rid of the truck and then buy 4 vehicles that look the same, at least when you open a truck, when you open a trailer, when you open a van, you know when you look at the bits and driver box that it's gonna look like this. And the next sort of modification we need to do is we have a shop where we replenish this. We need to sort of gather things together in that so restocking becomes easier. And there it is. So in our shop, we've identified everything that doesn't make sense to buy at a store locally. So for us, it's going to be Festool sandpaper, lie flat ductwork, specific types of markers or pencils or fasteners that we can't buy locally, and we have them in the shop. And when you need anything in the shop, you're going to one spot. It shouldn't be sort of spread around, because what happens is people don't know where to get things. So this one cabinet, for me, once again, it's a small shop. My whole shop for the whole business is like 25 by 25. So this is sitting on 4-foot by 3-foot sort of platform, and every single consumable in the business is in there. And obviously it takes more to renovate a whole house than is in that cabinet. So we've made decisions about we're never using more than a couple types of fasteners. We're never using more than a couple types of caulking. If there's a type of caulking on the job that my crew isn't used to using, we don't use it. We've sort of standardized all the things that work best for us and made sure we keep those things stocked. But we don't have anything in here that we can buy locally. So a good example is like you could buy a GRK structural screw. We use a lot of those. You could buy it at Home Depot, and then maybe it would cost you, let's say, 5 cents a screw, right? We found an online source where we can get it much cheaper, so we're always trying to manage that. And like the flooring protection on the top, that's something from online. We don't know if we need it, so we keep 2 of those stock in the shop. Everything on this list, every box has basically a QR code on it. So if it runs low, you just scan the QR code and then you immediately reorder it. Every person on the company can just scan it with their phone, and they have the login for the accounts, or they're written on the wall next to this cabinet, and they can reorder and replenish. If you're familiar with a 2-bin system, which is basically you have 2 bins of each item, that's something I'd like to move towards, but the concept there is you never run out. So when you empty one bin, you replace it with the other bin, and that means there's always inventory. I have 5 minutes? Oh my gosh. I thought I'd run out of content like 30 minutes into this. So basically where I was at with the standardizing things, figure out the tools you need. Just because you have a lot of cool tools doesn't mean that it makes sense from a standardization point of view. Try and make as many things repetitive as possible. Here's a look at sort of how we manage what's in a box. We have a spreadsheet for every toolbox, and you click that link and you can reorder everything. It's not only what's in the box, but how to order the inserts that separate the box is all in that spreadsheet. So I can easily delegate that. It's not in my head, it's in a spreadsheet, and every consumable is trackable. Oh, look it, we finished. That was perfect. So yeah, if you got any questions, if you're not bored to tears, I'd love to get on them.
My question is kind of about bulk ordering fasteners and things like that, and how that gets built. Like, we do all of our work possible.
Right, so we're fixed costs, so we don't exactly have that problem, but what we do frequently do is we'll just break up our orders so that certain things are getting sent to the job. So we have like milestone deliveries basically, so we're like, all right, framing's coming up, let's get 10,000 screws delivered to that job. Drywall's happening, let's get microfiber and multi-purpose cleaner delivered to that job, and then we're tracking that receipt to it. But there's definitely, because I'm not cost plus, there's a lot of ambiguity there because I don't really care to track it.
I haven't dived into the QR code thing yet. So how do you do the QR codes for the tool, for the screws and fasteners?
Yeah, so the easiest way I've found to do it is if you have a Google Chrome browser and you right-click, you can automatically create a QR code for free on that website, and then I just copy that, drag it into Label Maker software I use, which is just the Dymo one, which is free, but you have to have the Dymo Label Maker, and that's pretty much it. So it's just bringing me to a website, and from that website I can reorder. I don't, and they've voiced their frustration about that. So it's sort of a work in progress. Some of my team members have their own vehicles and they have their own way of being organized, and I've found it doesn't work to sort of impose my methods on them, but I will say if I show them a better way, for example, one of them has all his own tools, but he's been saying, I really want one of those fastener and drill boxes. I'm noticing that's better. So basically, I'm not pushing them to do it my way. I'm pulling them to see that there's a better way. I could, yeah. I mean, there's like sort of broadcasted where the only thing I can say is like we're scanning Amazon and we're constantly changing, but we're only really doing that on the items that we're purchasing thousands of. So this is totally anecdotal, but I believe Mercedes repair costs are too high. I believe Chrysler is a terribly unreliable vehicle, but it's the widest and the lowest. So if you're willing to churn and burn every 80,000 miles through a van, you may get a more functional van out of the ProMaster. I think the Ford is probably the most reliable out of the high roofs, but still like problematic. And I think the Chevys are the most reliable because they haven't changed in 20 years, but they don't offer a high roof. So I'm probably going to switch to a Chevy fleet even though it gets terrible gas mileage, and have a single axle box truck so I get the height. I think you try and make it easy, and you try and hire people you trust. One thing I'm thinking of doing is putting a price on the label. So if they understand that when they drop a GRK tip, that's a $5 tip, maybe making a connection to the value cost of it. But I think it comes back to hiring people that you trust that are going to do the right thing when your back is turned. Thank you all.
It's been a great week here at Build Show Live in Austin 2024. I want to thank one of our project underwriters, Polygaurd, who is providing this content from our classes, which were amazing in client management, building durability, and building science, where Polygaurd has been a leader in air and water management for a long time. We've used a lot of their below-grade water management solutions, but they brought out some great new stuff from their termite prevention to their air control products. Polygaurd's been solving things for builders for a really long time, and we're grateful that they're still working to make our lives easier every day. Thank you to Polygaurd, and thank you for your continued support of our educational content.